Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buenos dias. May I firstly apologize to you for the fact that I have to speak to you in English. I understand that there is a translation, which I hope will work. I'm afraid that my Spanish is so bad that I have difficulty even in ordering dos cerveza. Sometimes I have something different and I don't get the beer. May I thank the Menendez Peleaño International University, the Codere Group, Professor Cases and Senor Jose Romero for their kind invitation here today to speak to you about developments in the United Kingdom, about the United Kingdom's new gambling regulation, about the Gambling Act 2005, about the background to that new law in the United Kingdom, and about the way in which that new law will be introduced and will come into force over the next year or year and a half. I speak to you today, ladies and gentlemen, as a lawyer practicing in London, working in London, advising clients in London on the gambling laws in the UK. I am not, unlike the professor, I am not an academic, I am a practicing lawyer, and I talk to you in regard to the new law as a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. I think that the new law introduced into Great Britain is of relevance today, firstly because it introduces a new way of regulating gambling, a structure which has had some thought over quite a period. It's certainly not a perfect new law, but it's certainly a new law. And I think many people think it will be a better law than the law which the United Kingdom had before. And secondly, I think the United Kingdom law will be interesting because it will make, we expect, the United Kingdom gambling market an even more attractive gambling market, an open gambling market, a gambling market where it will even more so be open to all who wish to be regulated in the United Kingdom, to come to the United Kingdom and to be regulated there. I'm going to talk in the time I've been allocated about the UK gambling reforms. Let me emphasise that generally they are not deregulation. They are reforms, they are modernisation. In many respects, they make the law in the United Kingdom more complicated than it has been in the past. In some respects, they make it easier. For example, the law which you may be familiar with, under which nobody could play in a casino unless they had been a member of that casino for 24 hours, has been abolished. And before the end of next year, the rules which prevent casinos from advertising will also be abolished, and we will see full advertising, regulated advertising, but full advertising and marketing of casinos. So, as I say, not deregulation, but reform. Reform that was necessary because the gambling laws in the United Kingdom had become outdated. They had developed, as you can imagine, over centuries. They had operated differently for the three different categories of gambling. That's to say, what in the United Kingdom is called gaming, that's casino games, betting, which may be on sports events or other events, and lotteries. Each had been regulated differently, and the regulation of each had developed differently over a long period of time. The laws had last been revised in the middle of the 20th century, but they were illogical, and they did not deal with modern changes in society, in society's approach to gambling, and did not deal with modern technology, such as the internet, mobile phones, the ability to gamble on interactive television, and certainly did not deal with future changes in technology. If I have enough time at the end, I will touch on the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union in terms of gambling regulation. If there's yet more time, and anybody wants me to, I'll speak about the UK's relationship with the United States. It's very interesting at the moment, as I'm sure you can imagine. So let me deal with the Gambling Act and the history to the passing of the Gambling Act. Then I'll tell you where we are now in its introduction, in its implementation, and how we will go forward in the United Kingdom between now and the complete introduction and finalisation of the new reforms next year. As I say, there was a demand for a modernisation of gambling regulation in the United Kingdom. Parts of the industry, not all of the industry, but certainly parts of the industry, were looking for changes. The Gaming Board, the old regulator in the United Kingdom, which has now been abolished, and which used to regulate casinos and some lotteries, the old Gaming Board wanted reform. I think it's fair to say that the Blair government also saw this as an area for reform. That led in the late 1990s to the establishment of a committee of investigation. You may have heard of the Budd Committee. It was a committee headed by Sir Alan Budd, an economist. That committee produced a report. The report recommended reform. It actually recommended a lot of deregulation, which was not carried into the new law. The government broadly accepted the recommendations. There was parliamentary action and a bill. A bill, you'll remember, is the preliminary piece of law which eventually becomes an act of the United Kingdom Parliament. The bill was introduced and eventually became the Gambling Act in 2005. The Gambling Act, though, was not passed through Parliament particularly easily. It was not the technical piece of legislation that many of us expected it to become. It became a political piece of legislation towards its end. There was much media comment directed against the government, against Tony Blair and his government, which led to some changes in the Gambling Act, changes which have made the Act a little difficult in some areas and I think will cause some problems in the future. And secondly, the Gambling Act, the discussion of the Gambling Act was curtailed, was cut short by the general election which took place in the United Kingdom last year, and it was decided to rush the Act through Parliament before that election, so there wasn't quite the time to deal with it properly as there should have been. But we have the Act. We have a new Gambling Act 2005. You'll be pleased to know, or those among you who are lawyers will be pleased to know, it runs to over 230 pages. It's a big piece of law, but it is only a framework for the new regulation of gambling in the United Kingdom. It does not contain all of the detail. It contains a framework. It contains the core basic concepts and the principles under which gambling will be regulated in the United Kingdom. The detail is still being worked on, and I'll touch on that in a moment. The Act, though, sets out the principles under which gambling will be regulated in the UK. Firstly, it directs that all gambling in the UK must be operated so as to be crime-free. Secondly, gambling must be regulated so that it is fair to the players and it is open. That's to say, a player who takes part in gambling, whether it's gaming in a casino, whether it's betting in a betting shop or on a race course, or whether it's taking part in a lottery, he must know what it is that he's doing. He must know what he stands to lose. He must know what he stands to win, and it must be fair and clear to him. Thirdly, the Act says that children must be protected. There is stricter rules in the Act, and there will be stricter regulation to prevent children gambling and to prevent the advertising of gambling aimed at children. And also the Act says that the vulnerable, what it calls the vulnerable, the problem gamblers, have to be protected from themselves. A new concept in the United Kingdom, not something which has been looked at before. But against that background, the Act says that the regulators, the new Gambling Commission, must, wherever possible, allow gambling. The old UK rules, which said that gambling was something to be cut back, not to be made available, not to be advertised or marketed, have gone. Where possible and where consistently with the principles that I've just listed, the three principles, the new legislation says that gambling should be allowed. No restrictions, so long as it is properly regulated and properly controlled. The Act continues the division in the United Kingdom between the three types of gambling: betting, and that can be either fixed odds betting or pari-mutuel betting, or indeed spread betting, but any kind of betting will be allowed. Gaming, that's casino gaming, of the type that we're used to in casinos, and lotteries, normally run for charitable purposes, but run for charitable purposes very often by commercial operations which are allowed to make a proper return in running lotteries. The Act also, as I'm sure many of you will have heard, specifically deals with Internet gambling, remote gambling, as the Act calls it. The plan in the Act is that all kinds of gambling, whether face-to-face in a casino or in a betting shop or on a race course, and Internet gambling, remote gambling, whether on the Internet, television, mobile phone, radio, or any other future kind of technology. So the Act anticipates that there will be new developments in the future. That is defined as remote gambling. Both are allowed in the UK, and the Act says that both should be regulated on an even basis, on a straightforward basis. Wherever possible, there should be no difference between the way in which remote gambling and non-remote gambling are regulated and controlled. And as a consequence, the Act interestingly defines a casino not as a building in the way that we would be expecting to see a casino defined, but it defines a casino as an arrangement whereby people are given an opportunity to participate in casino games. Now, clearly that definition includes a building, but it also includes an arrangement on the internet, an arrangement through interactive television, or anything that anybody invents in the future. That will be a casino, that will be regulated in the same way. The Act, for the first time, has proper definitions of betting, pari-mutuel betting. It deals with the new concept that you may be familiar with in the UK of a betting intermediary, a company like Betfair, which allows individuals to bet not with a bookmaker, not pari-mutually, but with each other on fixed odds basis on the internet, with the intermediary, a company like Betfair, taking a percentage of the winnings for setting up the scheme and implementing it. Betfair, I suppose, described as the eBay of the betting industry, and a company that has been most successful, as I'm sure many of you will know, and which has led to some big changes in the way that fixed odds betting takes place and will take place in the UK. The Act sets up a new regulator, the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission is now in place. It started work last October, and it will regulate all gambling in the United Kingdom, apart from the National Lottery, the government lottery which is run by Camelot, as I'm sure many of you will know, and also, interestingly, spread betting. But everything else is now regulated by the Gambling Commission. As I said earlier, the Gambling Commission is directed to aim to permit gambling, not to restrict it, to aim to permit it, where that is possible in accordance with the objectives and in accordance with the rules being made under the new Act. Now, to operate gambling commercially in the United Kingdom, an operator is going to need at least 2 and possibly 3 new licenses. It's going to need an operating license. It's going to need a personal license, and if it's going to use a building in which the gaming takes place, such as a casino or a betting shop, it's also going to need premises license. So the old concept of regulation of gambling in the UK disappears, and we have this new arrangement of 3 licenses. But because the Gambling Commission is directed to aim to permit the gambling, there should be less difficulty in obtaining those licenses. The operating license will allow an operator to operate one or more of a number of different products. Casinos will be one operating license. Bingo, general betting, pari-mutuel betting, betting intermediary, lottery operating license, gaming machine operating license to cover arcades, gaming machine technical license to cover those supplying gaming machines into the UK. Gambling software licenses. For the first time, those who provide software for gambling products in the UK will need a license from the Gambling Commission. The license, the operating license, can allow an operator either to operate remote gaming, that's to say internet gaming, or land-based gaming, but not both. But the same operator can hold both licenses. no problem in the Gambling Commission allowing an operator, if he has the financial resources, the technical resources to do so, to operate all kinds of gambling. As a consequence of this new regime, for the first time, formal testing of gambling products will arrive in the UK. Those of companies who've done business there with machines in the past will know that there hasn't been a testing regime in the way that there has been in other jurisdictions, but there will be in the UK. Now, as well as an operating license, every operator, every business in the United Kingdom will have to have at least one of its employees, at least one person holding a personal license. Many companies will have more than one person. The rules are that all members of a company, all members of a business in a key management position, the board of directors, the finance officer, the executive officer, the technical officer, the compliance director, all of those individuals will need a personal license from the Gambling Commission. This arrangement is not that different from the one which applies at the moment for casinos in the UK, where individuals have to hold what's called a certificate from the old gaming board, but it is entirely new for betting companies. In the past, betting companies have not had the type of regulation which the Act now introduces for them. Also, companies will need to ensure that all of those individuals who can control or affect the gaming hold personal licenses. Croupiers, bingo club managers, inspectors, possibly regional managers will need personal licenses. The process for obtaining an operating license and for obtaining a personal license is still being finalised, but it should be available for applications from January the 1st onwards. But at the moment we haven't got any application forms. We're still waiting for the Gambling Commission to finalise the wording of the application forms. If a company wishes to operate from premises, it will also need a premises licence. So a casino, a bingo club, a betting shop, and what we would call an adult entertainment centre, an adult gaming centre like an arcade, a family entertainment centre like a bowl or an arcade at the seaside will need a premises licence. Those premises licences will not be granted by the Gambling Commission. They will be issued by the local authority, to use the UK wording, municipality, to use the US expression, for the area where the premises are situated. For that premises licence, there will be a public hearing. The public will be entitled to say what they think about the application. The existing operators in that town can have their say too. But the old rule, which said there could only be a casino if there was demand for a casino, is abolished. There's no need for demand to be proved, and the local authority, the municipality, again under the Act, is directed to aim to permit the grant of new premises licences. Now, we heard earlier from the Professor that there are 140 casinos at the moment in the United Kingdom. That is true. We have an interesting development. When the Gambling Act was going through Parliament, for political reasons, the government decided that there would only be 17 new casinos to be permitted under the new regime brought in by the Gambling Act. And it divided those casinos into one, and only one, large Las Vegas-type casino, defined in the Act as a regional casino, 8 large casinos, and 8 small casinos. And the rules and regulations about how big they've got to be and how many tables and how many slots they can have are set out in the paper, in the annex that I've put with the handout, which, if you haven't got, is certainly available here. And I'm not going to go through it this morning because it's complicated. But that means that for all of this new structure that we have, at least for casinos, there's only going to be, at the moment, 17 new ones. The industry, the casino industry, was very disappointed at that, as I'm sure you can imagine. Many of you may have shared that disappointment if you're in that sector. That led to many companies to decide that it was worthwhile rushing through an application under the old law, the Gaming Act 1968, which was abolished as the new law came in. But there was a window, there was an interval in which applications could be made under the old law. They could only be made, of course, in those places where they were permitted to be made under the old law. There were rules under the old law which allowed casinos only in certain geographical locations in the UK. And only could they be successful if the applicant who wanted the new casino under the old law could prove demand. The rules that will be swept away when the new law is in place, but which were still in force while the old law was in place. Until April of this year, it was possible to apply under the old law. It isn't any longer, but it was until then. That led to 138 applications being made under the old law for casinos which nobody had thought of applying for before. If all of those are granted, we will end up with 278 casinos, not 140, as the professor said, 278 casinos licensed under the old law, 17 under the new law, but the casinos licensed under the old law are allowed to carry on under the new law. Now, that is a typically British mess, I have to say. If that isn't a muddle, bearing in mind that we had about 10 years of preparation for this new law, we now have a muddle. We could have, as I say, 278 casinos plus 17 new casinos, all of them regulated under the new law, but the old ones, or the new old ones, transferred from the old law to the new law. Now, not all of those applications will be granted because you will not be surprised to hear that the industry are objecting. The existing industry are objecting to many of the new applications. Between now and the end of next year, there will be very, very many public hearings to decide how many of the new ones will be granted licenses and how many will not be granted new licenses. A British mess, if ever there was one. Let me touch upon, very briefly, some important points. Obviously, if gambling is offered in breach of the new Act, it's an offence. It's necessary to comply with the new rules, otherwise it's prohibited. A liberalisation of advertising. Much looser controls there will be on advertising. Casinos and betting will be allowed on television and radio. The detail is being worked out, but it will be allowed. Gaming machines. totally new structure for what are called gaming machines, and a new definition of gaming machines. Gaming machines in the new Act are defined totally differently from how they were under the old law. A gaming machine is now defined as a machine designed or adapted for use by individuals to gamble. Gamble means betting, lottery, and casino games. A machine designed or adapted for use by individuals to gamble, whether or not it can also be used for other purposes. Incredibly wide definition intended to make sure there are no future loopholes. No more fixed odds betting terminals for those who know the UK. No more Section 16 machines. A very, very wide definition. So the machine is a gambling machine, gaming machine, but in reality a gambling machine, whether or not it can be used for other purposes. Well, on the face of it, that catches a telephone. A telephone is a machine that can be used for gambling. Ring up your bookmaker on it and place a bet. So that's a machine used for gambling. So you will not be surprised to hear that the Act also sets out a number of exceptions to that that very wide definition, and a telephone is excluded. As long as it's a telephone that you've got at home or in your office, and it's not a telephone that the bookmaker's given you especially for the purpose of telephoning him. If he gives you the telephone, or more likely a computer, a PC, or if he puts the PC in a bar, and all it can be used for is to contact him, then it becomes a gaming machine. If, though, it's a computer or an internet terminal that can be used for all sorts of purposes, including contacting the bookmaker or the offshore casino or whatever, then it is not a gaming machine. That becomes important because of the rules and regulations about what the gaming machine can and can't do, the limits on how many there can be, and the limits on where they can be. Now, also in the handout, I have put a table which sets out all of this information. It is complex, and I'm not going to try and explain it to you. Today, there are 4 new categories of gambling machine in the UK, and one of those categories is subdivided into 4 other subcategories. They all have different limits on prizes and stakes. They can all go in different places, or a variety of different places, some in casinos, some in bingo halls, some in betting shops, some in entertainment centres, some nowhere at all, some in all of them, some in only one of them, and they are all taxed differently. The tax rates I've also set out in the chart. Taxation is going to be important for the new regime in the UK. Clearly, there's no point in having a wonderful new regulatory structure if the tax rates aren't right. We know that betting, fixed odds betting, is continuing to be taxed at 15%, 15% of gross profit. We know that betting intermediaries like Betfair and like companies which offer pari-mutuel betting are going to be taxed at 15% of their commission. We know that bingo is going to be taxed at 15% of the bingo operators' take. We do not know yet whether the existing tax rate for casinos will carry on. If you know the UK, you know that the tax rate for casinos is on a sliding scale up to a maximum of 42%. Remember what I said earlier, the plan is to regulate all kinds of gambling, remote and terrestrial in the same way. If the UK taxes internet gaming at 42%, there won't be any internet gaming in the UK. The decision on that we expect by next spring at the latest. Let me briefly, in the 2 minutes I've got left before I have to stop, tell you where we are at the moment. As I say, the Gambling Act was passed last year, April last year, but it's taken a lot of time to bring into force. It's being brought into force as we speak. Part of it is in force. It will all be in force, we expect, by the end of next year. The Gambling Commission was established last October. It's consulting. It's talking to the industry. It's talking to everybody that wants to talk to it. The reforms will be fully in place, the government says, by the 1st of September 2007. We'll wait and see whether that date slips, but that's the date they're aiming for at the moment. One thing I didn't touch on is the issue about where the 17 new casinos are going to be. If there's only 17, where are they going to be? So the government set up a casino advisory panel to work out where to put the 17 new casinos. That is currently holding hearings. That is due to report by December this year. The government will decide what notice to take of that report and where to put the 17 new casinos. We expect that there will be dispute about that. We will not be surprised if there is litigation about that decision. But subject to that, applications for new licences, operating licences, personal licences, premises licences in 2007, ready for it all to be in place by the end of 2007. I don't think, Professor, I have any time to talk about the UK and the EU, but if anybody wants me to talk about that or about the UK and the US, I'm very happy to do so. Thank you very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.